live. There's always a slight delay. But yes, so we're live. Hello, everyone. This is episode 18 of the Armory Roundtable, and today we have a HEMA guest. So we're here with Alexander Fürgut, and he wrote a book on the Schielhau, which we're going to be talking about in quite some detail, I think. But he also is really involved in the world of HEMA and content creation around HEMA as well. So Alexander, thank you for joining, and I'll let you introduce yourself because, as usual, you probably do a better job.
Thanks for having me. Yes, I'm from South Germany, Ulm, which is between Stuttgart and Munich, halfway in between the two cities. And I founded a club here called Schwabenfedern in 2011. And basically, I've been training longsword for the first 10 years, and then afterwards I switched to rapier as my main weapon. And I've been teaching, I've been traveling around, I've been to tournaments here and there. So I did a lot of stuff, basically, like probably a lot of people who have been at it. Also, I'm co-host of the German HEMA podcast Schwertgeflüster. So we are the only one, so we are the best and only German HEMA podcast. And yeah, I wrote the book called The Schielhau in Detail, which we're going to talk about today. Where else?
Yeah. Thanks. Yes. So maybe before we get into talking about the book, do you want to maybe tell us a little about your HEMA path, like how you got into it, what motivated you to kind of get so invested into it, and so on?
Yeah, basically I had a friend and he did some reenactment and did like HEMA way before. Like when he was 16, there was like one HEMA group in all of Baden-Württemberg, and they knew some people, and then he stopped when he moved here for his studies. And at some point he was like, yeah, maybe we should do some HEMA with the reenactment guys. And he asked them, and they were like, oh yeah, sword fighting with swords sounds like a great fun. Alexander, do you want to join? And then I have no idea what you're doing, but you told me about swords, so yeah, let's go. And the fun thing was that many of the reenactment people were not that into the whole moving around, doing sport, getting sweaty thing, as it turns out. Mm-hmm. But for me, at least, I was pretty hooked. Like this, you always have the feeling that what you see in media and so on is kind of wrong, but you don't quite know how. And then when someone starts explaining and you can just read the historical manuscripts from the time, and it's suddenly things clicking. Oh, this is not how they did it. They did not fight with super heavy swords that they could barely swing, but this is actually quite technical. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so basically that's how I started. I was hooked pretty much immediately. And yeah, the first couple of sessions were in the backyard of the local university. And we trained with the good old Dave Rawling nylon swords. And as you had to transport them from and to the field, that's when people like, oh, is this a sword you have with you? What are you doing? You're doing sword fighting? What are you doing, HEMA? Never heard of it. Where can I join? And so basically that's how we started out here. And so I'm the only founding member still here. And it's been, like 15 years already.
So you've seen the HEMA community, basically, were you the first generation in Germany in a sense, or had there already been like the 90s people, a bit like in England?
Yeah, so the first HEMA groups in the German-speaking Europe, so Austria as well, parts of Switzerland, they started in the very early ones started mid-90s, the later ones started end of 90s. So like Dreinschlag from Vienna is from 98, and others. I think Zornau was somewhere around the 2000s, Askladi and Dornborn and so on. So that's really the first generation. So I guess since we started 10 years later, that's already some ground has been covered, like with the old Askladi forum, for people who still remember that, which was the German HEMA forum at the times when people still used message boards.
But history.
Like I basically started when people are on the edge of they stopped using she-knives because then the nylon swords were there and they were better, and some of the steel swords got a bit better, like they had some flex to it, not the reenactment stuff. That's kind of like the border where I went and started HEMA. But you still didn't have a lot of equipment. You used lacrosse gloves and so on. And pretty soon after, the first space jackets came out a couple of years later, I think.
So you, saw it transition into an established activity sport. When have you seen like drastic rise in the last years, or has growth been fairly stable?
No, actually, I did something called the HEMA census. So where I contacted the groups twice, once in 2019 and another time in 2021. First one was just for Germany. The second one was for Germany and Austria. And what I figured out is HEMA is basically growing, and it's growing fast. There were some setbacks during COVID and so on, but the overall trajectory is that HEMA is growing in Germany, as it probably is all over Europe and worldwide. I mean, you can count the number of groups. There were a lot less groups when I started out. There are a lot more today, but also the number of fences. So just to give you an idea, there are, and I'm checking the number just to, so the estimation is that it is like in 2021, there were about 4,600 historical fences in Germany alone. And 2019, it was something around 4,900, so a bit more because then people stopped training. But this is around the number we're speaking. And today, there's probably more like in the 6,000 range or even beyond that. So you can see a big upwards trajectory.
And moving into your book, let's say, is this growth a reason why you felt the need to write a book on technique, or what pushed you to kind of get into this kind of big project?
Okay, for one, I didn't think it was this big of a project when I started. I massively underestimated, because at first, and this is one of the reasons why I only wrote a book about the Schielhau. I thought, hey, writing such a huge book about the whole of, let's say, Liechtenauer's longsword is a huge task. I'm not sure if I want to do this. I have never written a book just for fun. Do I really want to commit such a massive amount of time? So maybe I pick a little part of the system, write something small to it, maybe 20, 30 pages, ebook, publish it on Amazon, see how it goes. If I like it, I will do it more. But then I thought, okay, how can I make it better than what's already existing? Because if you just want the basics, like the how do I do it? You can't just watch a YouTube video, 10 minutes, be done with it. And then I was like, okay, I have to really go into detail. And then from there, it kind of escalated to nearly 200 pages. And the reason I did it was that it's basically, for once, it's something I haven't done. So I did the podcast, I tried some video editing, which I didn't find that fun. So what was open? Well, write a book. And also that when I started it, it was the point where I switched my main focus for my own training from longsword to rapier. So I thought now is a good time as any, because if I don't do as much longsword, it's not changing drastically, most likely. Also, it hasn't changed that much in the last couple of years. So if I want to try it now would be the time.
Okay. So in the meantime, hi to Julian Ronenberger from Switzerland. So we're just talking before it started about Swiss viewers on your podcast, but we have at least some Swiss viewers here today. Okay, so why the Schielhau then, out of all possible techniques? And is it your favorite? Did you talk about it because you like it? Is it because it's unique? What's the reason?
Well, basically, it is my favorite. So that was definitely one of the things. But I thought about maybe you could do the Schwerhau, you can do the Zornhau. And when I started to write the German book, basically, now we are in year 4. So this year is marketing, talking about the book, getting it out. Last year was finished doing the English translation. And the 2 years before we're writing the book in German. So when you go 4 years back, if you just looked at the scene in Germany where I fenced mostly, then people were doing all right with their Schwerhaus. Like there's always stuff you can improve, but mostly people figure it out. Same with some of the other cuts, like Zornau. Yeah, not that used, but people could do it well enough. But when I took a look at do people do the Schielhau, do they do it well? That was missing at the time. So I think by now, especially the international scene has figured it out. But back in those times, it seemed to me that this is something that not a lot of people can do well, and I like to do. I could do well, at least that's what I thought. So maybe that's something that I can start with, because I thought about doing it like in the order that is in the sources. I can start with Zornau. But then it was like, do I really want to do the Zornau? I could do it. It would be okay, but I really would be more interested to do in the Schielhau, because it's a bit more challenging to doing something where not everyone agrees how you should do it. And so I can give you my opinion, my option. And if you like it, that's good. If you agree, that's good. If you learn something else but don't agree, that's fine as well. But I thought this would be something that could have a positive impact and bigger than if it just repeats stuff that most people know already. Still, the beginners would find it useful because there's always a new people joining HEMA. But I thought this could be something potentially where I had a impact on the discussion.
Well, so before we actually maybe get into the Schielhau, then, when you mentioned that the technique worked well for you, what is your background in HEMA? Like, what is, in what kind of context did you use it to make it work, and how was that lived experience?
So we started out looking at Liechtenauer sources, mainly the 44A8, the Peter von Danzig, and it's kind of been our main focus from the start. And one thing we knew pretty soon was that we wanted to be a club that did a lot of free fencing, and basically to get and instruct so that we have competent free fencers. So whatever we did, it should work in this context. Now, I also went to tournaments for many years, and that's also something where I thought, like, okay, this is a challenge. People will not allow me to just goof around, and it needs to be solid here as well. So that was also one of the points where I thought, okay, if it works, like if we're going easy in free play setting and we're going a bit slower and it works there, but then also if you have a high intensity tournament match and it works there as well, and it's plausible that it's matching the sources, then that's kind of my criteria for if this is the right way or not.
Okay. And so you mentioned that you kind of already went into it knowing that the Schielhau is I don't know if controversial is the right word, but let's say at least it's a technique where people have different kinds of interpretations.
Absolutely, yeah.
So in your experiences, the Schielhau, does it stand out as a technique that is open to many interpretations more than others, or is it just the standard for every HEMA technique that everyone can read it in different ways?
I think if I look over how it went with the other techniques, then in the beginning, not a lot of people understood them. And people had wildly different ideas how to do certain things like Zornhau and Schwerhau. And over time, certain ways to do it turned out to be more favorable than others. And people starting using those more. People made videos about it, talked about it, showed each other, did workshops. And so at least from what I can see, you're starting out with very, very scattered techniques, very different approaches. And then it kind of streamlines to a couple of, let's call it mainstream interpretations of how to do things. Like if you take a look today, people do the Schwerhau differently from each other. There are a lot of variations to it. You can do it in different ways. But basically, you can recognize that someone is doing the Schwerhau, no matter how exactly he's doing it. And I think the same thing happened with a lot of other things. And at least when I started, I think this is something that has not happened with the Schielhau. And the last couple of years is something that been explored more. It seems to me that kind of like at some point people find their favorite solution. Also, there's kind of a like meta game in the how you fence with each other. Mm-hmm. Like people spam Schwerhaus for a couple of years, and then someone figured out how to beat it, and then people learn from here. So you kind of someone figures something out, then someone tries to beat it, and the overall level in the community improves. And if you go to some areas where HEMA is pretty new today, probably you see that they have very different ideas, but give it like 5-10 years, and they will also have figured something out. So what is working and for them in their context, how they are doing things.
Okay. So before we dive into the details of the book and the technique you describe, what is kind of the historical context, both in which the Schielhau would be used, but also where do we see it mentioned? What kind of sources do we have for it, and what's its context?
I mean, it's one of the 5 hidden strikes of Liechtenauer, so you find it in every of the Liechtenauer sources together with Stornhau, Tverhau, Scheitelhau, and Krumpau. You also find it in later sources, of course. Meyer has it, like Joachim Meyer has it, but he also has different things that, how should I say it? He has taken the system and boiled it down into smaller and smaller parts. So you have different things that could also be called Schielhau in the earlier sources. And if we take the introduction of the Liechtenauer verses seriously, then it tells you this is the techniques that are described here are for Schimpf and Ernst, so for serious fighting and for sport, playing around, training, basically. And yeah, that's where you're using them.
Okay, so the whole concept of the secret techniques, do you feel that's a bit of a marketing language, or is there a reason why these are separate from, let's say, the standard techniques?
I mean, if you look at later sources like the Rapier sources, they do talk that if you are attacking in the, like you are attacked and you're counter-attacking, you're doing contra-tempo, that this is something that is not easy to do safely. Like, of course, double hitting is easy, but doing it in a way where you hit and do not get hit yourself, that's a tough thing, because a lot of things have to be right for that to make that work. So it kind of makes sense because well, there's different ways to do the master cuts or the hidden strikes. And besides the Scheitelhau, they are used as counters, like in death techniques where you counter an attack with another attack. So from that perspective, it makes kind of sense to say, okay, this is something that you do not necessarily teach right from the start. Because it's something that you can recognize as well if you are trying to build your curriculum and try to teach people how to fence longsword, and you teach them very soon the master cuts, then they're, okay, so there's an attack and I do an attack as well, but they cannot do it well enough to do it safely because they're lacking the awareness of when to do it, the body mechanics, and so on. So, I mean, probably there's a bit of marketing involved as well, but just from a pedagogical standpoint, it does make sense to not teach them immediately. But then again, if you look at the Liechtenauer sources, it's right at the beginning, so it's not like they teach you something else and then go to the master to the hidden strikes. Yeah, so I'm not quite sure about this how I should view it, because on the one hand it makes sense to not do it immediately, but on the other hand, how hidden can they be if everyone who wrote some commentary on Liechtenauer settles just told you, yeah, that's how you do it? But then again, we don't know too much about the historical context of the Liechtenauer, like, was Liechtenauer a real person, when did he live, and so on. So maybe that's something that we will figure out more, and the academic side has taken a closer look at the sources.
Yeah. So when it comes to your book, then, what is because, and you mentioned it already, that the technique can be shown in a quick video, let's say. It doesn't need the amount of work or pages. So what was your goal in building up 200 pages of analysis, let's say, of the Schielhau?
So what you find in the early sources is how to do a technique, and with more or less detail, depends a bit on what you're looking at, but the how, and you find a little bit of the when, like, okay, this is what you're trying to counter. but there's a lot more things that you need to do right to make it work. Like, even if you just take the situation, what exactly is happening here? Like, okay, he's attacking me, but did I invite him? Did I give him an opening so I knew somewhere he will attack me somewhere in this area? What about the timing? Did I manage the distance so well that I can kind of predict when the attack will start? So I'm prepared. Both I know where it's going and what I'm doing. And also body mechanic, like even if I do what's written in the text, like unless you're doing something like the Fräser where you have really, really detailed explanations of how to do everything, that's something that you have to do right enough for it to work. Because if you have a really weak body structure, then you might have the perfect timing, perfect distance, but still your structure collapses and you get hit. And all of those things are not that easy to explain. And if you want, like, that is something that's actually useful together with strategy and tactics to explain in writing, because then you can really dig down and take a lot of time and explain it in detail. If you do just like a 10-minute explanation video, usually that stuff is covered on some maybe not superficial level, but on a level somewhere between what was in the original source, but also between writing a detailed chapter in a book about it. And I thought that this would be something where a book would have some advantage. Like you can really point down into body mechanics, tactics, and so on. And so the book is called The Schielhau in Detail, and it is about Schielhau, but it's basically about all those things with the example of the Schielhau. So because I've read other books where you or also from other martial arts where you just have those individual examples, and like, so you're throwing a punch, you have to do it like this. And that's good. But when I read them, it was like, okay, but when do I use it? Can you give me an example where I can do it like this exactly right here and now? And I thought this would be a nice experiment to have one central theme running through the book, the Schielhau, and explain everything that's relevant for the Schielhau, but boil it down to the really detailed level and have a discussion here, because it's easy to say, oh, I'm doing it differently, and then that's it. But sure, you're doing it differently, but so this is my reasoning for doing it a certain way. Like, this is how you hold your front hand. You're doing it differently. Why? So this is my argument. What's your counter argument to doing it differently? And even if you disagree in the end, I think thinking this deeply about the topic and about all those little puzzle pieces is helpful for people who are training longsword, where at least with the early sources, you don't have that much written already.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally of the opinion that the more discussion you can have on anything, the better things are for everyone, the more you can kind of open up topics. So maybe going through without spoiling too much of the book, because of course it's 200 pages. So if you if you really want, you should read it and buy it. But we go through a first chapter, which is about who the book is for. So do you want to quickly kind of summarize or give an idea of why certain people may want to buy your book more than others, let's say, or find more value?
Yeah, so let's say if you have been doing HEMA for 15 years and you have your Schielhau and you do not want to change it, you're perfectly happy with it, it works for you every time, do not read the book. That's not a book for you. If you are a bit newer, like if you're a total beginner and your first week in HEMA, a lot of the stuff will be over your heads anyway. So, I mean, you can still get a book and read it again a year or two later. But I was aiming for the point somewhere in between, where you have a little bit of experience, so I don't have to explain which point of the sword is forward and which is backward and how to hold it, like the very, very basics. But then again, reach some people who are not... who have not made up their mind completely. And somewhere in the middle, where people are still open and it's like, okay, I have some ideas how to do it. Maybe I can do it better. Maybe I can take some parts of it because, okay, I can follow that explanation, but use it for other techniques. That's kind of what I was aiming at.
Okay. So the second chapter, and this may open up a longer conversation, is the basic Schielhau technique. So one thing you do mention quite a bit across the book is that this is your interpretation, and you mentioned it already even so far in this stream. that people may disagree, and actually they probably do, because everyone has different, well, not everyone, but let's say a lot of people have different interpretations of things. So why, or how do you, I'm curious about the title choice in a sense, because it seems a little bit, someone may find it controversial in a sense, let's say, because on the one hand you say, yeah, this is a approach to it, a vision of the technique, but the book is the Schielhau in detail. So how do you navigate that kind of potential controversy, if there is any, maybe?
I mean, you have to call it something. And I was really thinking about this, like, I could have gone with the easy choice, like doing the Schwertgeflüster. People agree about the Schwertgeflüster, is not a lot of controversy here. But do I call it something else? But call it something else. But then people say, but this is not what I think about something else. Yeah. So whatever you choose, some people will disagree with it, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, we're doing HEMA, so we should discuss this kind of stuff. We should disagree about it, but we should do it in a way where you actually like, here's what's written, here's my argument, because that's always one of the things. If you write this stuff down, then it's not just in your head, not just in your group. You're basically putting it out there for people to say, to critique it. And that's in general, it's fine with me. And I think when in your announcement as well, some people think this is some kind of cop-out. But what I wanted to avoid was people just opening the book, reading 5 pages and saying, oh, this is not a Schielhau, just closing it in and not reading the rest. Because I think even if you disagree completely about my interpretation, there's still a lot of useful stuff in there. So you kind of have to catch those people and say, hey, listen up. I'm not saying this is the be-all, end-all Schielhau, this is the only way to do it. It's just this is the way I'm explaining it to you, because I think this is the way to do it, and this is a good way to do it. But feel completely free to do it anywhere else, call it anywhere else, call it anything else. And at least when I did some beta tests with the German and English version, it seemed to work, because there were some people who were like very angry for the first 5 or 10 pages. And then at some point they're, okay, I can accept that this is your interpretation and I don't have to accept it. Because if you do read a lot of martial art books, and not only necessarily HEMA, HEMA is one of the least worst offenders, but some people start from the point of, oh, you have no idea what you're talking about. All of you suck. I know what is right. This is how you do it, and everyone who disagrees with me is an idiot. And that's not the route I wanted to take.
Okay, cool. And I mean, when you mentioned that, okay, of course, it's your interpretation, but it's also backed by quite a bit of experience, because you, you're not just a HEMA practitioner, let's say, on your spare time, but you also did competitions, and you have achieved a certain level of hands-on experience. So it's not coming from, yeah. So what is then your interpretation, without spoiling too much, of course, but let's say, what is your interpretation of the Schielhau, and how does it differ from, what are the main opposing points people have brought to you?
So the main point of contention is, which edge do you use to hit your opponent? Let's start once before that. There are many different ways to do the Schielhau, as with the other master cuts, depending on how close you are to your opponent. But the basic 2 ways are, one, you can throw it so far away that it lands as a thrust. So you do a motion that is like a cutting motion with your arms, but then the point hits and stabs the other person. And if you're closer, you can do it as a cut to the head or to somewhere else, like the shoulder. And the basic point of discussion is, which edge is used for what? Which edge do I use to bind the opponent's blade? Which edge do I use to bind the opponent's head? And the way I do it is, the long edge is up. That's what I'm catching the opponent's blade with, and the short edge is down. This is what I'm attacking the head with, or the shoulder, or whatever way you're going for. And if people are doing it differently and disagree, then they are like usually trying to do both, like attacking and binding with the short edge usually.
Okay. So the big controversy is really on an aspect of alignment more than how the technique actually plays out in terms of the broader movements, let's say, or the Yeah, it's more the details, let's say.
Yes, but this also influences where you can attack. Like, do you attack your opponent's left or right side of the head? And also, there's like the whole discussion: can you do a Schielhau as a thrust or not? So my personal opinion about the hidden strikes, aka the master cuts, is they are all examples for a certain way to do this, like a certain body mechanic, how you move your body to achieve something. And you can do all of them either as a cut or as a thrust. Because if you're a bit further away, you automatically get a thrust, and if you're a bit closer, you automatically get a cut. And I think that's one of the reasons, because, and I remember when we started out for the first couple of years, it was like, why are there 5 or 6 different ways to counter an Oberhau? Like, why is that necessary? Just give me one good version, and then I'm happy with it. But I think this is one of the reasons, because if you look at them at ways to move your body and as certain body mechanics, then it makes sense, because then you can explain it with one situation, like someone attacks with a right Oberhau, and you can play it all through and say, okay, you can move your body a certain way. This has advantages and disadvantages. You can move it in a different way, and so on. And this also influences what techniques you can do afterwards, like if your strike gets parried or whatever, or you miss.
So maybe the unclarity, let's say, is built into the technique, in the sense that there are so many variables in different situations, depending on distance, on kind of momentum and stuff, that the technique can take different shapes in different scenarios. Would that be kind of a correct assessment, you think?
For the thrust and cut debate, yes. For the edge alignment, it's how you read the text. There are certain like, where do you put the comma into punctuation? How do you interpret the pictures we have? Like, I have one of the pictures in there from Paulus Karl. Like, I'm not saying that doing it differently is wrong per se. I'm just saying that I think this fits the sources, and it is useful to do it like this because it's a very safe option. Usually the short edge binding and attacking Schielhau, it's hard to keep your hands safe against an Oberhau. If the guy just parries and you go through with it, that's fine. That's something I also described. But if it's a blade moving towards you on a cutting trajectory, and then you try it, that's usually, if you look at like slow-mo videos of people doing it, then their hands are, at least from my perspective, exposed. So that's what I think. If I have 2 options, and one is very, very safe for your hands, where you have a lot of, let's say, fault tolerance, like you can make some issues, some errors, you have some issues in your overall setup, and still be safe. And the other thing, you have to do perfectly, and otherwise you get hit on the hands. I would, as a default, choose the safer option. At least that's how I look at things.
Okay, understand. We actually do have a comment going back to what we were talking about of the naming and different opinions. So Julian does have, he has an opinion on the suggested naming, I guess. So yeah, confirms, let's say, the great difference of opinions in the HEMA environment. So yeah, feel free, anyone to, sorry.
Just to add to that, I thought about this, but I can see a lot more critique if I just called it Alexander's technique, because then it's like, who is that pretentious guy telling us he invited his own technique or whatever? Of course, this is XYZ technique. It's already in the Liechtenauer system and so on. So yeah, there's at a certain point, you have to put your foot down and say, okay, do I go route 1 and route B? Both can be critiqued. I decided to go for this because, in all honesty, I didn't know if people even wanted to read the book. Like, this is a detailed book. It could have been that people said, oh, you know what, I'm not that interested in the Schielhau or that deep discussions about body mechanics and so on. I'm fine doing it what I'm doing. No one bought a book, which fortunately is not the case. So people have been reading it, and I think most of them liked it, at least from what they're telling me. But this was on many fronts an experiment. If this is something that the HEMA scene was interested in or not.
Speaking of the experimental aspect, the next comment kind of plugs into that pretty well. Will there be a book called The Zornhau if he ever gets angry?
Yeah, so when I finished the book in German, I told people, you know what? If this does sell well, I might be inclined to think about writing another book. If this doesn't sell, this is too much work and it's too hard to write a book, I will not do it again. So it has sold okay, I think, or maybe even well, depending on how you look at it. So yeah, let's see if I'm get bored at some point and think, okay, now it's the next one.
Because you might have to make it into a series. That might be a bit of a huge project.
Yeah, that's the thing. Now it's a one-off, but if I do it somehow, then it's like, yeah, okay, so 2 of 5.
Exactly. Okay, so if we move into chapter 3, we have, I'm just going through the chapters so people can get an idea and maybe you can comment. We don't need to go through them in detail, but if you have anything interesting that you feel potential buyers may find useful, we can discuss it, of course.
Yep.
Chapter 3 is details of the Schielhau body structure. So do you want to give us a few points as to why this is important and what you kind of distilled into the book?
Yeah, so just to give you one example, so I think this is let's see, what can we take? Let's take the leeway chapter. I think I have some useful stuff in there that not everyone has thought about. Like if you have people who have who did this for a long time and have talked with a lot of people, they might have figured it out, but even then it's useful if someone tells you your approach. And if you're doing certain techniques and the way you grip your sword, like I'm doing the Schielhau on a thumb grip. So let's say, how do I hold it? Like, do I press it? Do I hold it relaxed? Where do I put my wrist in which position? And as it turns out, if you like press with your thumb here on the first knuckle of your what's it, the index finger, I think in English.
Yep.
Yes. And if you do that really hard, it's not as easy to move your wrist in the different axes. Like if you relax here, you can go a lot further and it's a lot easier. But if you press it kind of strongly, then it gets harder to do so. And at least with the people I trained with and I taught, this is a common thing. Like there were some people who said, oh, it doesn't make a difference, but for most of them, this is something. So if you know that, and if you want to have a certain way, like you want to have a straight wrist, you know, okay, if I'm in a thumb grip, I can just press here. This immediately makes everything easier because it makes it much harder to be in an unaligned wrist position. And you can try it out at home, of course. And if someone tells you this, it's like, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, okay. And you can just do that. You can just press here and have a nice wrist alignment. And there are many small tidbits like this in this chapter. And if you take the sum of it, I think they do increase your body structure. Like you being a more stable, you're harder to push around. Your blade is harder to displace, and each individually is not that big of a thing. But if you take them all together, some of it makes you much tougher. And especially if you might be on the smaller side as a fencer, you need to have every advantage that you can get. If you like fencing, I'm over 190, so if you're fencing like someone like me and you're a smaller fencer, you need to have every advantage in your book. And all of those things I could just tell people, and they're like, okay, yeah, can kind of feel it, but what is it good for? But having it based on the Schielhau, it's something that I can try. I can go out there and say, okay, I've already know how to do the Schielhau basically, so let's try this out. Is it better? Is it worse than before? Usually it's, oh, okay, this makes sense. Now it's better. And I can train to do it. And it's with many different things as well. Like, should I push my hands out and straighten my elbows? Should I not do that? Does it matter if I hold the sword here in front of my sternum, more to the left, more to the right? Stuff like that.
And are these things you mentioned in this chapter, because that's actually quite interesting one, because yeah, as you mentioned, it does go into a lot of detail about position, and this would be useful even outside of the Schielhau, of course. It's not
Yes.
Schielhau exclusive. So if I understand correctly, attaching it to the Schielhau is just a way to give it more kind of reality in a sense. It's immediately, you can immediately try it rather than see it in theory and hope you understand. Which, by the way, is another really cool thing I think about the book, is the I think I actually fall exactly in the ideal reader, in the sense that I'm not so experienced in HEMA. So, for example, for me, there's a lot of pictures in this book, so a lot of things are shown in quite a bit of detail visually, which many times I find myself having to build a technique in my head, and with the possibility, of course, of interpreting it mentally incorrectly. So I find this very, very cool, and especially when you apply it to these details of positioning and everything, it's really interesting. Yes.
Yeah. So one of the goals I had with the book was to, if people just read some parts of it and they put the book down, they should already have learned something that they can take with them and try out. Because with other books, again, HEMA books, but also other martial art books, you'll have to read half of the book to get to the juicy bits, where there's a lot of introduction, a lot of basic info. But I wanted to turn it around. Like, if you just read the first 2-3 chapters and then that's it, you don't have any time or whatever, it should already help you. So I tried to remove everything that was not necessary, or at least moved it to a later point in time, so we can get right to it. Like, I tried to front load the biggest value of the book to the front. So if you're doing it, you're reading it, just take this part, and then if you want to, you can read the rest. I think it's still helpful, but the big bucks is hopefully at the beginning, where it's like, oh, okay, this makes sense. I've learned something here.
It's an interesting point where you mentioned this, because the next chapter is arguably, this I guess is up to personal opinion, but could be the part that people don't care about or do, but is the Schielhau and the sources. So this is more the actual going into the documents you analyzed or studied to get to your interpretation. Do you want to tell us a little bit of what these sources are, and is there a priority in terms of the ones you like? Do they all agree? What were the differences, if any?
Yeah, so basically, what we were working with mostly over the years was the Peter von Danzig, so the Codex Danzig. This is what we have based most of our stuff in. But then again, it's not the only source talking about the Schielhau. And just to preface this is not like be-all, end-all source discussion of the Schielhau, because there are many, many more that I did not discuss in any detail. Basically, it outlines, okay, this is how I understood it. This is what in other sources I think it matches this. This is what in this source it's phrased slightly differently. I still think it could fit, but also there are some other points. So these are kind of the discussions that you're having if you're interpreting something like, okay, I understand it like this. I think this matches this, and kind of not only give you the end result, but also a bit of the thinking behind it, how you can read certain parts. And yeah, basically, let's see. So I talk about the Codex Danzig, the Judelé manuscript, Codex Reinecke, the Nuremberg Hausbuch, Peter Falkner, and Joachim Meyer. Even so, I at least think that Joachim Meyer is doing a different version of the Schielhau, probably the short edge binding and hitting version of the Schielhau, which does have its uses, which I do describe, but which I think is not the ideal default version of how to do it.
Okay, and in terms of actually, maybe the first question I would have is, why did you include these sources versus excluding certain of the other ones? Is it because of repetition, or is it because of lower level of authority of these sources? Like, what was your criteria?
I mean, these were some of the earliest Liechtenauer sources, so it makes sense to include them as well. And then at some points you have to say, okay, you have a little number of sources at the beginning, and then it's kind of growing over time, and you have copies of copies of copies, and you have to add at some point. I've added Joachim Meyer because for many people view him as like the back end of the Liechtenauer lineage, even though it does already do a lot of stuff differently. But then it does the advantage that it does go into more details for many of the strikes, not necessarily the Schielhau, but for other things as well. And yeah, in the end, I tried to keep it to mostly the earlier sources. But it's tricky, by the way, because I've written all the stuff in German, and then I had to translate it to English, and it had to still make sense in English. And like I thought translating the whole book would be quite easy, considering I already had a German version. But of course, there's a lot of stuff in there and things you have to think about when you're doing a translation. Like, do I call it the Schielhau, or do I call it the squinting hue or the squinter? Do I use only the German words? Do I use the English translations? Do I mix it? If so, how do I mix it so that it doesn't become too much repetition? So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on, and I think this also is something that is helping you understand the sources. Like, I have messed up left and right in some places when I did proofreading, and like I read this already 10 times and I still missed it, and I found it on the 11th time. So it's easy to see how, if you're writing some like back in the day, writing some sources down and you're some monk sitting somewhere, that it's easy to mess up left and right. It's much easier to think, because how you can do it? It's written right here. But yeah, even if you have a German and the English version side by side and you're just going over it, it's stuff that can happen.
Yeah, especially if you consider that many times, I don't know for fencing treatises, but let's say for many books, lots of the copiers weren't even really experienced in what they were writing. So the possibility of misinterpreting something drastically is really quite present. You mentioned before that some of the differences in interpretation come from stuff that's as small as the positioning of a comma, for example. Do you want to tell us a little bit of some of the really big interpretative hurdles you had to face?
Okay, let's open the book actually, so that's so basically the intro is you're coming towards him with the Schielhau, and then it's standing with the left foot in front, hold your sword at your right shoulder. That's the easy part. And then if he strikes high at your head, and then the fun starts, because then it's turn your sword and strike against his strike with the short edge long from extending arms over and above its swords on the set. So in Germans ist: so verwend dein Schwert und hau gegen seinen Hau mit der kurzen Schneid lang ausgereckten Armen ober über sein Schwert ihm zu dem Kopf. So, and here the interesting part starts, because so I'm turning my sword. All right, so probably something with the short edge. It's at least likely. But then I'm striking against his strike with the short edge. Do I strike against the strike with the short edge, or do I strike with the short edge long from extending arms above his sword to his head? Like, what is the short edge part? Is it the strike, or is it the head? And that's basically the main thing where you can say, okay, no, I understand it differently. You're striking the blade with the short edge. Yeah, that's definitely how you can understand the part. Or it's like you're striking the head with the short edge and you're binding the blade. So it's kind of how you can compartmentalize it.
Yeah, and I mean, this, if you like, I've listened to a bunch of Guy Windsor's podcast as well, and this is just one of those problems that keeps coming out in terms of interpretation as time goes by, and he himself in his work, I think on Fiore, keeps rethinking certain details and ending up with so the interpretive aspect is really crucial. But then you have to add also the translation part, at least for English. And so what were the biggest obstacles when it came to, let's say, maintaining the messaging in a different language?
I mean, one of the things is, do I attempt to translate it myself, or do I use just quote someone else's translation? And also, the sentence structure is different in English. So even so in German, you can make the argument structuring a sentence in English where this still makes sense to explain it is tricky, to say the least. And still, that's the basic idea when you're translating. How close can you be to the original language, and how close do you want to be? Like Michael Chichester make this rhyming Liechtenauer translation, and to make it rhyme, you cannot be you cannot just translate it one word for word. You have to have some leeway, so you get this. And yeah, you have to find certain compromises here. And yeah, by the way, I did quote the Hagedorn's work in many places, and I did some comparison, like how do different people translate to English. And yeah, it just these translations are usually very, very good, at least from my standpoint. But then again, I have not studied German, so at least from a layman's perspective, basically with a lot of interest in the stuff, I think that's the case.
And do you feel anything is truly lost in the like how much? I mean, something is always lost in translation for sure, but do you feel overall it's possible to communicate, let's say, a good enough approximation of the style of exposition, but also the content and everything in a way that the English reader can get a good enough idea, or should we still learn German?
It depends on what you're trying to achieve and on what level you're working with the sources. If you have some, how should I say it, like some mental room for ambiguity, and you say, okay, I can accept that this could mean different things and I don't understand the original, so depending on the translation quality, this might or might not be the case, then you can work fine with the English sources, because you're getting the gist of it, even though not every small detail might be translated perfectly. But then again, of course, it would be better if we had most sources just translated from someone who is really good at translating it. And I think there are some people out there, of course, not everything is translated well. And I think that's one of the things that, like the first translations that were available in English, I think were some of the early Ringek translations. And the German version of Ringek is a bit difficult from language-wise. It's not as nicely structured as the later or the different sources like the Codex Danzig. And some of the first translations were just not super good. Like the English and the German were quite different, let's say, at least from a German speaker point of view. So yeah, of course, we should strive to have it as faithful as possible and to get as close to as good enough as we can make it, basically. But then again, there's some ambiguity in the German as well. So even it moves the ambiguity to a different place, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so moving on in this quick navigation of your book, we then have follow-up actions. I found also this to be an interesting chapter because it actually moves to the after the Schielhau, let's say. So we're already moving into, let's say, well, follow-up exactly. So, and again, this is all a bunch of techniques that are not exclusive to the Schielhau, but you, I think, make a lot of interesting points there as well. Even points that have to do, by the way, with the aspect of modern sparring. So let's say mutual understanding of the depth of contact you want to go into, the kind of contact, consent around using certain like throws, especially when you come to wrestling or grappling. So what was the reasoning around building up this chapter with the follow-up actions, let's say?
So up until this point, there was everything in the book to make you succeed with the Schielhau. But of course, this is not always possible. It's sometimes offensive for people who are just better than you. But the Schielhau is still useful if you manage to do it and not get hit, because then you're closer to your opponent. And you can end up in a quite advantageous position because you just close the distance. And I think to have a full understanding of longsword fencing or any fencing, basically, you cannot just train and think to, okay, I'm doing the action and then, well, that's it. I either hit or I'm out of ideas, but you have to incorporate what could be happening afterwards. And also, what you usually want to avoid is people just freezing because they don't know what to do. And So this was something that just makes sense for me to include because, well, what happens if it doesn't work? Like, it's not the end of the world. It can just continue. And there are some things that are easier to do than other things. So maybe just explain them a little bit. And also give you a bit of an overview how to think about follow-up actions. Because like different follow-up actions are good in different situations. So I think this was something that was interesting as well to talk about. How do I choose it? What are the factors here? Similar to how the body mechanic chapter works.
Exactly. Cool. And then we move into two interesting chapters that I think this can benefit from a little bit of a discussion here. But it's the next chapters are on tactics and strategy and on the difference between these two approaches. And yeah, you go into quite a little bit of detail about them. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your approach to tactics and strategy?
Yeah, so first up, people usually often, or let's say oftentimes, confuse which is which. So just to give you a little bit of a definition, body mechanics is what you're doing after you've decided you want to do a certain action, let's say the Schielhau, and how you execute that action, that is body mechanics. Now, tactics is the question if someone attacks you in a certain way, let's say an Oberhau, how can I react to that? So how can I answer an Oberhau? In this case, you can do it with a Schielhau. But then again, there's certain specifics how he's doing the Oberhau, so maybe you have to adapt some things or think about some things. And strategy is your overall approach to fencing. Like you have certain attributes. You might be tall or tiny. You might be strong or not so strong, fast or whatever. But also you have a certain character and you have a certain preference to doing things in a certain way that results from your character and your body and so on. And the strategy chapter is what I'm describing here, I called archetypes. So certain types of fences that you don't necessarily see exactly like this, but you see certain tendencies in people that mean they are fencing in a certain way. And that's something that you need to know how to react to. And also that opens the window to exploit it, basically.
And I find this quite interesting because, of course, this kind of archetypical approach exists even in treatises and the different kinds of names you have for different sorts of fencers. But you seem to do the same thing in a sense, but with a more modern approach, in the sense that some of the archetypes you have here are things that you would more likely see in modern gyms. The first one you have is the suicidal fencer, which
Yes.
sounds very, very much like a byproduct of modern sport fencing or HEMA, let's say, rather than the training for real use. You also have the hand sniper one, I find very interesting, and the wrestler one as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit maybe about these, or at least some of these archetypes and how they differ perhaps from the archetypes we see in original treatises and how they instead fit better in the modern scenario?
Do you have any specific archetype in mind from the
For me, the suicidal one is the one that is the most. No, I don't have anyone in mind in terms of the past ones.
So the suicidal fencer, let's start with that because that's also what the chapter starts with, as you point out. Mm-hmm. You're right in the sense that this is possibly or well, maybe likely a byproduct of how we train nowadays. Like people can tank a hit if it gets them to whatever goal they have, hitting you first or hitting you with the afterblow or whatever. But then again, suicidal fencing does not only happen by choice. So people say, oh, I don't care. I just go in, hit, don't care what happens to me. But also sometimes people are just too inexperienced. Like beginners oftentimes tend to be somewhat suicidal, but that's not due to a choice from them. It's just that they are not that good at reading the situation. So they do things that would, more experienced fencers, you would not expect them to do. So it's true that this is some kind of an artifact, but it's not only that. And also, again, of course, we do have some anecdotal evidence, let's say, from some duels with later times with the rapier and so on, where people do just double hit each other basically and then die a week later or something.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that's one of the most frustrating things to just get double hits all the time. And it's not fully in control how your opponent behaves, but that's kind of what the chapters are about. There are some ways you can somewhat at least control how your opponent is doing. And you do have some influence over making it less likely that you get the double hit or suicide fencer, because there are certain tendencies you can use against this kind of fencer. And like, let's say the basic idea would be, if I'm standing, let's say you would be a suicidal fencer. It can also be you're just tired that day. Yeah, you're not concentrated. You don't, not on top of your game. And we're fencing. And what I should avoid is being in your range, because if you don't react to my attacks and to my prodding and you just hit for me and I'm in range, you will likely hit me unless I'm good enough to parry it all the time. But then again, if you just do it in a moment I'm attacking and I have not recognized it, you will likely get me. So what I should do most likely is stay much further away and lure you into an attack, and then, for example, attack the arms or the hands, because it's much safer for me. One, you are attacking, so you have committed your energy, your momentum in a certain direction, so it makes you much more predictable. I'm not getting into your range, so I'm just hitting whatever you bring into my range. And this is, like, if I'm explaining it like this, it's not super complicated stuff. But I think at some point someone has to explain these concepts to you. It can be your instructor or this talk or whatever, because then you can start to see, okay, I see a certain tendency today. Usually it is not Gabriel is not a suicidal fencer, but something is different today. Maybe I'll just stay further out and do some hand snipes from there and see how it's going. Or I'm giving you some openings that you're attacking and then I'm countering. But I'm not initiating, I'm not staying in your range and hoping for the best, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I found this section, just in general, these last 3 chapters, quite interesting in that sense, because especially as a non-very experienced practitioner, or I don't even know if I would call myself a practitioner at the moment, but who dabbles, let's say, in these are things that you don't think about as much. Lots of times I think maybe you look at a technique and think how to apply it, but there's the whole aspect, like you mentioned, adapting the way you fence to, especially if you know the person, if it's someone you spar with, as you mentioned, different days, different behaviors, and that can really help a lot in terms of your results when you're able to either adapt or force the other to kind of move in the way that you see as optimal.
Yeah, and not like you seldom find people who are always suicidal. Usually it's in certain situations, in a certain state of mind, in a certain level of tiredness, awakeness, whatever, a certain experience level, and it gets better over time. For some it gets worse. It gets better at the beginning, then default, whatever. And I'm kind of also trying to take a bit of this stigma out of it by explaining, hey, this can happen to the best of us. I had times where I went suicidal because I was not fully there. It's not a big deal. Yeah, it's not ideal, but then again, there are some ways to mitigate it. It's not just blame your opponent for doubling. You're at fault as well.
Yeah, makes sense. You then, the last chapter is FAQ section and common problems. This is interesting. It has a very internet content feel to it, like the FAQ, and in that sense, what I found interesting about the book is also that in a lot of sections you mention, hey, if you have different opinions or if you have something that you know that's different from what I'm saying, get in touch. And so it feels, lots of times books feel like a closed channel of communication where you're just kind of receiving whatever's on the pages. Instead, what I notice a lot here is the invitation instead to kind of get in touch. And does this mean that we'll see maybe further editions of this book, or that this is a book that is ever changing in a sense and evolving depending on potential debate that may come out of it? Or is it what we see here is what is going to always be the Schielhau in detail?
I mean, I have made some smaller updates, like fixed some typos and stuff like that. That's, of course, something you're going to see. the likelihood that I will change the whole approach and say, oh, okay, this is not a Schielhau, I'm writing everything differently, that's not going to happen. Smaller stuff, yes, because I mean, there's always the possibility that I'm wrong with certain things. Like some things are a matter of opinion. So sure, maybe you can do something. But then again, I did test this quite extensively. So I had multiple rounds of beta reading for the German and for the English edition. And I think I caught most of the things there because, some people criticed something very fairly. And at one point, or one point I made, which I'm not going to mention, was just wrong. Yeah, so looked it up, person was right, removed it, and that's it. And so don't think that they will rework the overall approach, but let's see. I mean, usually you do this after like 10-year anniversary edition or something like that with whatever you've learned in the in-between time. But I think if I wrote this book 10 years ago, this would have definitely been one of the things that could have happened, because then the interpretations and the approaches and the details and so on were changing a lot more. And when I wrote the book, it already stabilized quite a lot. So I'm not expecting it to be that big of a thing to going forward. But yeah, I mean, it's not like people have written many emails to saying like, oh, I see this differently or whatever. Some people tell me in person like, yeah, I disagree on this point, but the overall response was, even if people disagree with certain details, the book overall is still valuable to read, because you can take parts of it to whatever your approach is.
Cool. And one thing I wanted to also touch on is the meaning of Schielhau, because even there's a little bit of, you already kind of touched on the aspect of the squinting. And what is a Schielhau in terms of like, how would you translate it? Does it mean something in German, and how would you translate it in English?
So the literal translation is squinting. So squinting can also mean different things in German and in English. The usual way that people look at it is because that's in the place of the Schielhau, that you look to a certain point and then you attack somewhere else. So that's not that big of a thing if you're wearing masks, because it's hard to see the eyes. But like I'm looking there and then I'm attacking here, something like that. So that's usually the way this is read, that acting like you had a different intention from what you're doing. So it can be just your bodily like shielding, looking somewhere else, but it can also be read as the active deception, basically.
Yeah. So again, talking about interpretation, I guess the way you interpret it really makes a difference, because if you see it as the actual act of looking somewhere, and that's one very detailed thing, but if it's more broadly deceptive attack, that feels like it's way more open to different approaches. And how important do you feel the looking in another direction is, at least historically? Do you think that's the correct interpretation?
I mean, it's one of the plays, so it's definitely in there. It's just not that it's described in every play. So it's one thing, and you could very well see this is how you name the cut, but I'm not sure if it takes more deception than some of the other cuts, because it's always useful to lure your opponent to attack in a certain time frame, in a certain way that you are prepared for. So that's something that also is good if you're doing the Zornau. So yeah, ultimately, like I said, I have not studied German. Maybe there's an even better explanation of, okay, this is how you used it in that time, and then this is this. So yeah, I can't tell you too much about any alternatives here.
Okay, so a lot of things I think we've been talking about so far cover, like we've seen a lot, at least the historical part, but also how it applies in the modern, let's say the difference compared to a modern approach to fencing. Like just the mention of how you can't really squint when you're wearing a mask is already, let's say, a practical difference that modern fencers face that maybe wasn't there in the time. Federico Malaguti, for example, among other people, has been talking recently, relatively frequently, about his feeling of HEMA being on, let's say, the verge of perhaps maybe not a split, but like an evolution as an evolving and growing discipline, and maybe going more towards, let's say, part of it at least more towards the sport direction, and part of it maybe in a sense more to the academic research. Do you kind of generally think that that is a direction you agree with, or do you have a certain vision of how you see HEMA evolving and developing in the coming years?
I mean, what do you kind of? Yeah. Sorry?
Yeah, sorry. I think it's yeah. I'll let you talk.
It's kind of. It always seemed to me from talking with people from other countries that Germany had a special place in this discussion, because for the longest time, Germany was very much, overall speaking, like I'm generalizing, not individually, but overall in the tournament suck camp, because they're totally not historical, double hits all the time, bad fencing and so on. And when other countries went like, yeah, we don't see the big contradiction here. You can, like, this is part of it. Sport is a historical thing as well. We have to train it somehow. So it's not just dueling to the death all the time. And there is definitely some changes over the years. But it's, for example, the use of protective equipment. I can tell you from experience, this was not because everyone wanted to fight tournaments, but you injured yourself all the time, and people broke their fingers. So people wanted to have better gloves, but then you had better gloves, then it's, oh, now we can do some tournament fencing with some higher intensity stuff. And of course, you can make the argument that this higher intensity led to even more equipment development, but I think that's kind of a reductionist argument. It's going hand in hand, that people also want to just go a bit faster, a bit more intense, just without tournaments necessarily. And where we will end up with is kind of a good question, because of course the context you're fencing in depends what you're trying to achieve and how you fence. Like, I should clarify this. It's more on the tactical and strategic level how your fence will be different, because you cannot suddenly change your body mechanics from one situation to the next. So that's something that's ingrained in a habit, but your tactics and strategy can definitely change if you change the context that you're fencing in. And then we are back at the discussion of, all right, so I don't like the current tournament scene, so I'm making the perfect rule set. Mine will be the be-all, end-all to fix everything that is wrong, and people try it and they figure it out. Okay, this is actually not that easy. It's quite difficult to create rules that produce a kind of fencing, and you always have to make some compromises where you say, okay, this is something that we want to see, and we are ready to not see other stuff as much. So, I mean, if we're ever at the point where you have just like one common rule set and everyone trains that and nothing else anymore, yeah, then the sporty side has won, basically, because then that's what most people will be doing. But then on the other hand, HEMA is such a anarchist movement where everyone is doing their own thing, so no one's stopping you from just doing it differently. Yeah, it's just that the popular thing might be something else that what you necessarily might be doing or might want to be doing. And that's definitely something you have to be ready for if you've been doing this for a long time.
And as someone with, let's say, your finger on the pulse of HEMA, at least in Germany, do you have some impression of where you think the majority of new practitioners or people that join HEMA fall, like more towards the more regulated sport or more towards like the research and experimentation kind of approach?
Most people in most clubs, I would say neither.
Okay. So
because most people probably do not do extensive source study, but they also do not go to tournaments. Like you see this with other sports as well. Usually just a fraction of the people in any given club is going to tournaments, or at least if it's a larger club, like if it's 10 people, it's possible all of them do tournament fencing. And of course, you could kind of force that or expect that and have bigger clubs where everyone is doing it. But at least at the moment, from what I can see, there's a group of people who are really into that, who likes to see their rating go up or down or win, lose, whatever, or view it as a good way to practice. And there are other people who are into the reading the sources, analyzing it, and so on. And potentially it does look like there are more people who are doing the tournament side than the historical side, but I think the vast majority is just somewhere in the middle, where they're interested in the whole thought thing, also based on sources thing, is bringing them into HEMA. They like that they're not getting hurt each time because they do have protective equipment. They might know that people of doing tournaments might watch some, might even try one out and then figure it out, oh, this whole pressure thing, metal and so on, it's not for me. And then they're back to doing fencing however they do it in their club. So, and I think as long as we have those people, I mean, there have been some arguments over the years that even having this mass of people in the middle is not a good thing because they should all be doing this or that. But I think that's kind of how the way it is at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine to an extent that's just natural for a growing community, especially one that has, potentially two quite different, or maybe more than two quite different approaches, let's say. So a lot of people will just be doing it as oh, this looks cool and I want to try it out and see how it feels.
And I mean, it's a good thing that people get moving because at least with HEMA, that's my experience, and it's the same for me as well. We often get people who are not into sports before that. Like they're always like, yeah, football, soccer, baseball, whatever, balls are not my kind of stuff. Like martial arts, Muay Thai or boxing look too tough. But HEMA is somewhere in the middle where you can do some fencing and you can get intense, but it's not as intense, not as injury prone, and you still get a good sweat going. And I think that's perfectly fine. Like good on you to improving your health and not sitting around at home and getting to know some other people who are into nerdy stuff as well.
Yes. Yeah. And in terms of one thing that I've been quite interested in is how generally the community seems very open to, for example, the whole debate. You, I think, talk about it even in the book a little bit, like fencing. The openness, for example, to women in the sport is just very present, I've seen overall, whereas in some environments, you could say they're not always as welcoming to all kinds of people.
Yep.
Do you see a big growth, let's say, in non-stereotypical people interested in swords, as we would imagine? Is it something that's growing?
I'm not sure about Europe because usually you do see those trends first in the US and then like 10 years later somewhere in Europe, and there's something there's definitely something going on there because now, or let's say the last couple of years, many of those discussions have reached Germany, for example. Like how should we treat trans athletes so it's fair for everyone and they're well integrated? How should we structure this? Like should we have men and women tournaments? Okay, but this is not really inclusive. Maybe do things differently. And the US has been talking about these things for 5 to 10 years more than us. So, but yeah, if you do take a look at many of the people who do HEMA, like I said, it's very common to have discussions and talk with people where they are like, yeah, you know, back in school when I do school sport, I was always the last one to be selected for a team because I was that much not into sports, and now I find something that's actually fun to do and use. So yeah, I mean, good for you. So if people should have a place where they can be themselves and still move around and meet some people. And we're all a bit crazy anyway for doing all the sword stuff.
Yeah. And maybe one of the advantages of this big middle group that you mentioned is that actually you can kind of build your own sparring partners and habits in a way that fits your specific needs without having to enter a category or like a set environment where you may be either disadvantaged or overpowered, perhaps. So yeah, that sounds very cool.
Yeah, I mean, if we just did hardcore tournament fighting, you can very much expect the percentage of women to drop dramatically because that's what you're seeing in other very, very high contact sports as well. There's still some there, but yeah, it's not like any majority.
Okay, cool. You also, of course, apart from writing your book, training and practicing, you also run, as you mentioned, the only perhaps, but biggest podcast in the German-speaking world. Um, Maybe it's interesting to also get a little bit of your perspective, I think, on the non-training side as someone who produces content and education slash entertainment, of course. Um, is there is it a vibrant environment in the sense are people talking about things, creating content apart from podcasts perhaps, but do you feel like there's a big commentary community in a sense, or is it something that you feel would be nice to have more of?
I mean, I probably sound way older than I am, but back in the day, you had like 3 or 4 YouTube channels going on. Like you had the Mad Eastern Scholar Gladiatoria channel, which was a HEMA practitioner, but then you also had already the list was ending pretty soon, and you had Scalagrim and Lidibesh, who at some point trained HEMA, but not really, and so on. And if you take a look now, then a lot more people do create short content on YouTube, for example, or also Instagram, TikTok, and so on, just because the community grown over time. More people write books because if you go back 15 years, there were only a handful of publications of HEMA books that might be relevant for you because back then, if someone wrote something about the military saver in Victorian England or something, that's not something I would have bought. But the stuff that was relevant for you, you just got it and read it. And nowadays, there's just so much stuff coming out, book here, book there, video series, video course, and so on. Even the podcasts. If I try to follow and listen to all the people we had collaborated with that had some podcasts of their own, not necessarily HEMA, oftentimes some history podcasts, but also like this format here, I would not be able to do it. It's just too much content coming out.
Okay, that's yeah, it's really interesting because sometimes it feels like, as you mentioned, things, at least in the common conversation, haven't moved away from the main channels. And oftentimes it seems like there's the need for more, but then yeah, it's interesting to see that there's so much already that you can't really follow it, even if you put 24 hours a day into it.
I mean, I might want to add that even Germans oftentimes publish their stuff in English, especially when they're doing YouTube videos and so on to reach a bigger audience. And that's one thing that we with Schwertgeflüster decided earlier not to do. We wanted to be a German-speaking podcast and keep it regional. So we're inviting mostly German-speaking guests from the region because the advantage here is that there is a high likelihood that you actually will meet those people, or you can just invite them over for a seminar or whatever. And you said, oh, this sounds interesting. He's doing Dreschflegel, the flail from Paulus de Meyer. Oh, where does the guy live? Well, it's basically next door. Get him over here for a seminar and stuff like that. And while there's, of course, used to bring the whole community worldwide together, especially to hearing from regions that might not be as close to you. For example, if you're living in the US and you hear from some people in Australia, that's interesting getting their perspective, but the chances of you meeting up are very slim. And I still think, even so, that many people aim for the international appeal and doing it in English, there's still room for some regional formats where you really get to a smaller group of people together and get them exchanging ideas and so on.
Especially, yeah, as you mentioned, the fact of this being a community that is growing, but also still small enough that you can meet a lot of people in real life and actually like interact in a real way rather than just online. That makes a lot of sense, I think. One thing I've been hearing recently from a few people is the expanding of HEMA into Asia, like the fact that a lot of Chinese students seem to be really getting enthusiastic, and so they come to learn, and then schools are opening up, for example, in China. Have you had direct experience with this kind of phenomenon? Is it something you're involved with, or what are your considerations on like? It almost feels like we're going in the opposite way compared to 30, 40 years ago when everyone was doing judo or karate, and now suddenly you have HEMA in China?
I've met some Chinese people on some of the international events here in Europe. That was quite a surprise the first time it happened. I've not been over there myself, but I do take a look at it. And I think it is interesting because, yeah, for one, that's the exotic factor that you mentioned, kind of like the Karate Kid in reverse. But then again, I think HEMA figured out something that no one was really doing before, like fencing with steel weapons while doing it, let's say, mostly injury-free. Like figuring out a level of equipment where you can go kind of hard and kind of quite a bit of intensity and still go to work the next day. And no one was really doing that. You had the people who trained with steel swords, but then without contact, or maybe in the sharp swords, and then of sharp swords, and then of course without contact. If people trained, they did it with like bamboo shinais and so on, or like the Philippine styles with just the sticks and so on. And at least from what I've read, there are people who are trying to bring this kind of training to their style. Like the Sigi made some training katana that you can use like a feather. And at least as far as I'm aware, that's not something that was really big on the market. So I think there is some trend where people are also saying, okay, so these HEMA guys have their sources and they can just go directly to the source and read it. Do we have something like this as well? And people started reading old books in China and Korea and so on as well, and figure out, hey, we do actually have the same thing. And we take a look, and this sounds kind of different of how we are doing it today. Why might that be? Because even if you're trying to to give something on to the generations in a faithful way, over a lot of time, still things change, because I'm telling you things are a certain way and you understand it a certain way, and you go on, and then stuff changes. And I think there are, like, if you take a look at this can be at least interesting, but also it's challenging some, let's say, hierarchies that have been established. So let's see how that goes, because usually those things don't go without people having big fights.
Yeah.
And not in the good fights.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you do need the growing pains to be able to really expand.
By the way,
yes.
If I can add something to the sports source discussion. One of the main questions with the whole evolution of modern HEMA, let's say, is what are we trying to achieve here? Do we want to have a, let's call it static or dead martial arts, where we do things exactly a certain way and give it on to our students in a certain way? Or do we want to have a live and evolving martial arts where people collect experience, then someone who has a lot of experience teaches you create your own experience based on that, do certain decisions? And I think that's one of the key points. Like, if you really boil it down to it, it's not about sport or not sport. It's about, hey, is it okay if HEMA evolves in a certain direction or not? And the problem is with the just reading the sources. At some point, a lot of people did this before you, and they figured it out, and they wrote it down, made some videos. So the amount of stuff you can figure out for yourself is not the same amount that you could do 15 years ago. So this gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So it's kind of natural that people look to other venues, because hey, I've read this book and I read this paragraph and I think this means something. And then you go to your club and tell people about it, and there are like 5 people who've been doing it for more than 10 years. And, oh, we had this discussion like 10 years ago. This is what you misunderstood or something. That's not a very rewarding experience in and of itself.
For sure. Do you think actually your book falls into this approach of trying to, let's say, build upon what is already existing and like bring some fresh outlook into it?
Yeah, so I make no secret that I'm building this on my own experiences. Like, I'm trying to explain why I think this matches what is in the source, but then again, I do explain a lot of things that are simply not written down. So that is definitely something that I'm drawing on. And it's, yeah, maybe with the whole growing of HEMA, that's kind of the way things go, that you're kind of niching down. Even in like longsword is not exactly a niche in HEMA, but let's say it is. You have the Liechtenauer longsword, which is the niche of a niche, and then you have specific things in those niche that are people doing, creating content for. So let's take the HEMA Breakdowns YouTube channel, for example. He's in the tournament niche, breaking things down from the big tournaments. And I think that's a useful thing to do, because even if you disagree with some of the tactical and strategic decisions that people are making, the discussion of measure, feinting, and so on is still a useful thing to learn about, having someone explain it to you and having the videos to learn from it.
And do you think that this kind of evolution of the sport, in a sense, or of the practice, may lead not only to new forms of content or analysis or conversation, but will there be a moment where hypothetically new techniques are developed based on the new ways of fighting, or of the new context in which people spar or fight? Or will we always kind of be around that general set of techniques?
I mean, some of the sources just state plainly, hey, you won't find any technique that doesn't fall into my system. Good luck.
Yeah.
But if you do, it sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah. I think what is more likely to happen is that things are reduced, because that's usually what happens if the rules get stricter. You're losing parts of the system. And for example, that's something that happened to judo. Judo is not that old. It's like from the 1910s or 1920s, so around 120 years, something like that. And it had a certain curriculum. Like there's a certain number of throws and ground techniques that are part of the system. And somewhere in the, I think, 90s or beginning of 2000s, they had the whole rule change, because it looked too similar in the Olympics to wrestling with the bent postures. So they forbid leg grabs. And what they did is they just took a big chunk out of the system and removed it. And I think that is more likely to happen. You just take chunks of the system and remove them due to safety, not working under a specific rule set, and so on. So what you end up with is probably still something that you can describe with whatever terms you're using for fencing, but it's not a full system anymore. It's something very optimized, where you have just this limited number of techniques that are working. And if we ever end at the point where, let's say, the HEMA has been fully Spotified, everyone is fencing badly from the point of view of people who criticize this is the most likely scenario, that just you removed so much that what you end up with is not really that interesting to begin with.
Yeah, so basically the process that we've seen in Olympic fencing, in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
I mean, that, like, I was at a seminar doing my instructor certification, and it was together with some Olympic fencers, and so I taught them something and they taught me something. So you had some, let's say, fresh eyes who were not familiar with the system. And basically I was thinking what I'm supposed to be doing with them. And I just told them, hey, you just keep your foil or your épée. Here's the parrying dagger. I'm showing you some very basic things, and then you can just fence with the parrying dagger. And yeah, as soon as you allow them to do something with the second hand, it changes quite a lot what they're doing. Like, you can still see their movements, of course. They cannot change their body mechanics from 1 minute to the next. But the decisions they were making were strongly influenced by having the dagger, and you can see that it was quite a lot of fun. And if one had the dagger and the other had not, it was very much more efficient. And yeah, so if just give some Olympic fencers a dagger and give them some basic rapier rules, or just keep the rules and just allow them the dagger, and you already get something that is more open, has more variety and in it. And it's,
Speaking of dagger and rapier, you transitioned from longsword into rapier. What was the reason for that? What kind of drove you into this change?
Not to go into detail here, but basically, it's I have some health issues that prevent me from doing a hard longsword sparring. Like I can do a easy round, easy contact, or just some medium sparring, but I could not fence with any intensity in longsword. And I tried out different stuff, and rapier. I do not have any issues here, and rapier is quite a bit of fun. And it was kind of like, yes, I've been doing longsword for a decade, and it's like I'm not pretending to have figured out everything, but it got a bit stale, maybe even. So it was kind of the right time to say, okay, I can do something else. What would be interesting? Oh, rapier is quite a fun, and I've grown very fond of rapier over the years because there's a lot of variety since you have one hand open to do a lot of shenanigans and dagger, cape, shields, whatever. There's a lot of stuff you can try out.
Yeah. Is there a format you prefer, like an accessory that you tend to prefer for your left hand?
Not a lot of people have read Nicoletto Giganti, at least that's what it seems to me, because for one, there's a good source in general. I do recommend it. But just in one of the books, I don't remember where exactly, before he shows you some dagger stuff, he just says very briefly, oh, and by the way, if you don't have a dagger, you can just do the same thing with your hand.
Okay.
And when I read that, it was like, oh, okay. I'm wondering if that's, and yeah, you can do just the exact same thing with your hands. And I don't know why, but not a lot of people are doing this. And that's like, I like to fence rapier and dagger, but if we are fencing rapier only and the other person does not use their hands offensively and defensively like a dagger, then basically I'm the only one with the dagger, which makes things a lot easier. So that's always a bit of fun you can do.
And in terms of style of rapier, like of the sword itself, do you have a preference towards one of the different hilt types or blade length or?
Yeah, I mean, with the hilts, if you're going open hilt, of course, there's always a danger that you just get hit on the hands somewhere or stepped on the hands. And I do use a cup hilt, even though I'm fencing more Italian and not Spanish. And it would be more in line to have an open hilt, but just the, let's say, likelihood of getting an injury in a point where it's might be difficult to heal versus does it really make that big of a difference? In many cases, not. In some, yes. So I went with the cup hilt. And I do prefer longer rapiers, but I'm a tall guy, so it kind of fits.
Yeah, yeah. We have a comment here by Myers mate. Sadly, cup hilts look very boring. I'm not sure I agree 100%. I think you can find beautiful ones, although maybe not in the HEMA environment. Maybe they're a little bit more designed for function, but I have to say I quite like them.
So a little anecdote here. The first rapier I got before I fully transitioned, like a couple of years before, was the Blows, the Stresa rapier with the extra long blade. So kind of a cross between Italian and Spanish blade. And the reason was that they had some special offer where they engraved your cup with some stuff, like some fancy lines and drawings, and then you also could get some text on the lower lip of it and so on. So yeah, I'm aware that many complex hills do look more fancy than cup hills, but I'm trying my best.
Yeah, and I guess you having a personalized or like a custom one is up there in terms of coolness.
I was kind of lucky that I do like to fence with this rapier, and it turned out to be a good rapier, but I bought it at a time where I didn't really know if this was any good or not.
So you still use that one? Is it still your go-to sword?
Yeah, so we bought two, one for my girlfriend, one for me, and my girlfriend rarely used hers because she bought the same length as me, and that's much too heavy and much too long for her. And mine broke like, I think 3 weeks ago, so I've been using it for 6 years or something like that.
Okay, definitely.
And yeah, but they do, I think they do cost like twice the amount of money than when I bought them back then, so
yeah,
inflation is a bastard.
Exactly. So if anyone has, in the meantime, any questions for Alexander, this is your time to ask them. Yeah, And in the meantime, I would like to, do you see big differences? You mentioned before, like the difference in the German approach to tournaments traditionally being the one of, no, we don't like this kind of thing. Do you see other big, like regional differences that you've noticed over time between countries or continents or areas that you think are interesting?
I think what's also different is how much a country is looking for international exchange. For some reason, especially Germany was kind of insular. Like there were no big HEMA events, and especially no big international HEMA events in Germany for the longest time. The biggest HEMA event in Germany now is the Sword Trip Gathering, and it's still a pretty much Germany and Austria and Switzerland thing. And like we didn't have any big international tournaments and not any big international events. Like Austria had the Rhine event, which was always quite international. And it always seemed to be that just due to the fact that you had so many people in Germany and so many clubs and so on, that there was less of a need to leave Germany or to get someone in. And that's something that we always tried in our club to get outside people in, like some of the more experienced international instructors and so on. But even then, it was not like this was a huge thing where everyone said, "Oh, I'm living in the north of Germany. I'm driving to the south," because they have those people there. And I think with some of the other countries, that's quite different. Like they're from the beginning saying, "Hey, we're making this event, but we're making it in English. But just like this is an international event, we want international people to be there." And of course, sometimes this is just due to the local scene being smaller, which I can see, for example, for the Scandinavian countries. But also it's a choice. Like, is this something that we feel comfortable with? Is this something that we want? Do we see a benefit in bringing outside people in and having big international exchange? And yeah, I think some countries are much more inclined to be on this kind of avenue where they say, yeah, we want to have those people. We make it as comfortable for them as possible to come here, and everything is in English and so on.
Speaking of now Scandinavia, and is there any quickly emerging region that, let's say, is becoming more influential on the international scene and maybe wasn't expected just a few years ago?
Yeah, good question. I'm not following, like, it can depend on what you're talking about, because due to the increase of the community, it's not like you have this one thing, like you have several sub communities. And for whatever reason, for example, in the German speaking countries, Spanish Destreza has really opened up the last couple of years. Like many clubs who did not do Rapier regularly, suddenly doing Destreza and doing this Academia de España. And that's something which is a bit surprising to me, because there always have been some people doing a bit of Italian, a bit of Spanish, but suddenly, like, you have diestros everywhere here. But besides from that, I think we have a bit of a special situation with COVID, where things got messed around, and suddenly Switzerland had the biggest international tournament with the was it a Swiss gathering or the other one that was the separate one? I just don't remember the name at the moment. But yeah, I mean, now it's back at Helsinki Longsword Open, so it's back in the north basically. But you do have multiple big tournaments that are spread over Europe, for example, in Slovakia and the Turnhau and others, and Dutch Lions Cup, of course.
We have Mayor's Mate again. Academia de Espada has gotten off. Yeah. So yeah. So there's been, let's say, it's not by chance, but let's say there's been a bunch of work and put into it. Okay, so that's interesting. Like for me, it's really interesting to hear about. It's not often that you get to observe, at least, or participate in a community that is, in a sense, exploding or growing really rapidly. So usually things are already established. So it's really cool to be able to see all these small and big changes going on.
I think one of the general trends you can observe is, as just everything is more. You have more events of any kind everywhere. You have you don't need to travel as far, can do a lot more stuff in your, like, say 2 or 3 hour driving range region. But on the flip side, this means that you as an individual have less and less impact or possibilities for impact. So let's say, like, if you started the biggest HEMA YouTube channel 15 years ago, probably everyone watched the channel. And I think Matt Easton was one of the people who who made it popular to call it HEMA. So that's a big contribution that you can trace down to one person just repeating it. Of course, others had the idea as well and used it before them, but I think really through his YouTube channel, he spread it. And it's getting, you're having less and less opportunity to make these big sweeping changes, because certain things are set in a certain way. And even if you have a great idea, you might get a sub part of the community to do it in your way and see it in your way and do that. You're being a smaller and smaller cog in the overall HEMA machine. And that's, you can debate if this is a good or a bad thing, but that's just how things goes. If we wanted to have it like a couple of hundred people spread over Europe, then but that's not the case anymore.
Oh, we have some more interesting comments here by Meyer's mate again. So the Germany, Austria, Swiss region is a lot different than many other regions in teaching dogma combined with what people are looking for. See all huge tournaments in Eastern Europe, a lot of big names teaching. And then he continues to use a German saying in it, that region is cooking their own soup. So what do you okay, so you agree.
That's basically true, yeah.
Okay. What would be, as let's say a practitioner, an educator, but also a content creator, the tips or suggestions you would give to someone that is today thinking of joining HEMA? What would your advice be?
Well, the good thing is it's easier than ever before. And I think that will be true each year than the one before. Even if you're in the middle of nowhere, there's just so much resources out there. If you're willing to put in the work and be consistent, you can totally build your own club and start your own club. I started my own club as well. Yeah, so it's a lot of work, but you can do it. And everything was much harder. Also, the availability of equipment and so on and so on. So we're definitely not at the how should I say it? Like at the maximum spread. Like we're not on the decline. We have not reached the top yet. So get in on the board right now. And if you want to contribute, feel free to do so. But you probably will need to niche it down a little bit and maybe do something regional or something specific to where others have not covered it. But still, there are those, let's say, gems left where hardly anyone has taken a deeper look at it or over a long period of time and published material on it. So those niches still do exist, and feel free to take a look at them.
I have the feeling also, maybe this goes outside of HEMA a bit and more into just swords in general, but so much information exists only in a very messy and unorganized structure. So you have it on forum posts that sometimes disappear in comments and threads. And there's so much that can be done, even just in terms of consolidating all of that information into something that is usable.
That's one of the things you have to think really hard about when you're doing a book. Like, I was constantly during the writing and beta testing, moving stuff around, moving this here, this there, removing stuff. And definitely you can make it a lot more accessible.
Yeah,
I would.
And sorry.
No, just.
Oh no, I was moving to another question.
I wanted to ask you actually about your channel, because you're kind of new to the game. You started this video podcasting format basically. So what is your goal with this? Because you are kind of late to the party, but I guess you're trying to achieve something here.
Yeah, so for me, I come to swords mostly as a collector, actually, and as a, let's say, From an academic perspective, although I'm still in my formal, ending my formal training at the moment. So I've always had an interest in history and swords especially. And it just kind of happened. My girlfriend actually suggested it at some point that she was like, oh, there's an auction going and they're selling some swords from the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. And I was like, oh, wait a second, I guess why not try and buy one? Then I've always wanted one. So I got to it almost from the opposite side. And initially, my interest in HEMA was just, it's cool to listen to some content like you were mentioning, Matt Easton, and these channels are the big ones. And the more I handled swords, like antiques, the more then I realized, it's probably pretty important to also get an idea of how they need to be used, because there's so much. Handling antiques versus reproductions already gives you a huge, like, it really is mind-blowing how different sometimes they feel. And that obviously makes you think, wait a second, why are we using, or how is this different? And so then I slowly started thinking, okay, well, I need to get a bit of an education even in terms of HEMA. And then I just started talking to people, and then it became like, oh, okay, why not have these in a format that other people like me that want to learn more can maybe learn from or enjoy? So so that's kind of it. There's not really a goal in terms of, I'm happy to talk like from the archaeologist to the sports teacher and get all possible perspectives around swords. Let's say that would be my goal.
But you're definitely trying to cover the academic side of it.
For me personally, yeah, because my passion is really with the antiques and like studying. So I'm finishing my master's in history now. My thesis is analyzing a collection of antique swords. So that is where my heart is. But of course, I even need to do some sport, to keep active. So HEMA is the perfect way to blend what I like and also what I need to do as well.
Yeah, that's always like you do get a certain kind of experience, a certain look how you look at weapons in museums and so on. And I was recently reading about Bronze Age weapons, and I found a paper where they mentioned that, for some of the time, one of the opinions was, probably they didn't use the swords; they were just some ritual implements. And but then if you look at it with a HEMA view, and of course it can be wrong, like your intuition does not have to be correct, but you look at the swords and you're thinking they do look quite fanciful, like the proportions and everything look quite good. Like
Absolutely.
I can totally feel them in my hand and moving around and doing good actions with it. Like if it's just for some ritualistic stuff, why make them so well proportioned?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I've seen some videos of people cutting with bronze swords as well, and they cut really, really well. So, I mean, it's not even something that you think, actually, not even videos. I already mentioned it in a previous video, I think, but in a museum in Bern, they have a exhibition on Bronze Age artifact, and one of the sections is about combat and war. And there's a couple of skulls with damage from like Bronze Age, and one of them is a cut, and like the skull is slashed open. So I mean, they work. Then how long the edge will last, that's a different, like whether they bend or whatever. But I mean, they're absolutely able to do some massive damage, and there's no reason why they wouldn't have been, for me at least, I think, functional weapons.
But the whole academic side of is like there's a lot more stuff open there than on the practitioner side, I think, because many of the sources had not been academically studied, and there's a lot more depth than you can go into here than you can, like a layman can, basically.
Yeah, and especially I think if you move to older stuff that's outside of the treatises and like the typical age HEMA looks at, I'm reading a thesis that looked into Longobards weapons and techniques, and basically the guy rebuilt some reproduction weapons and tried to kind of figure out fencing techniques. So it's almost a HEMA-ish approach in a sense. In fact, actually, I think I have to get in touch with the guy because I'm not sure he's local here, so I could actually meet him. And I'm not sure if he's an actual practitioner or if he built his thesis in a way that, but it would be really interesting to see, to understand why he did it in this way. And I think when you move into these areas where we don't even know how they use the fence, this kind of experimental approach can, be extremely valuable. So,
yeah, that's by the way kind of a life hack or HEMA hack. I think what people sometimes overlook is the importance of having cheap and available simulators for combat. And you see it with Rapier, for example. 10 years ago, the beginners Rapiers were like 400, 500 euros. So not a lot of people did Rapier. Then the prices dropped. You had those synthetics by Black Fencer and so on. And then there was some price pressure. So others tried to make cheaper steel Rapiers and stuff like that. And that's usually what does have the biggest influence, that someone figures out how to do it more cheaply and make it more widely available. And I think even though we don't have sources for Bronze Age weapons, it would still be a lot of fun to just fence with them, but you need to have some working simulators. Can even be nylon or whatever. And so far, no one has done that. But like if you could just buy a Bronze Age nylon sword for 50, 60 bucks, you bet that a lot of people in HEMA would play around with them and figure out how to use them.
Absolutely. I mean, they use sickles and like the more things there are, I think the more people want to play with them for sure. We have a question, another one here. This is actually for both of us by Myers Mate again. So what are your most prized swords, the ones most valuable to us? So do you want to go? Do you already have your answer?
No, I need to think a moment about it. You go first if you have some.
Okay, yeah. So I think one of them is my first sword, actually, which was one of these from this auction. So it was really cool one because it was the first historical piece for me. It's Dutch version of the 1796 light cavalry saber. And it's cool also because it has a provenance from the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. It came from the army directly into the depots of the museum. It was used in an exhibition together with many others. It's not that special, but so for me, that one is really cool because it's the first and because it has some history to it. And I think the other one is a walloon-hilted sword that has marks from the Veilsee, which was the Dutch East India Company, and it's dated 1717. And this was at an auction, and it wasn't described as that. It was described as like talismanic letters. But living in the Netherlands, the Veilsee symbol is like something you see everywhere on old buildings, and it's really so. As soon as I saw it, it was like, oh, wait a second, I think I recognize that, and I kind of bought it as a bit of a gamble, and then figured out that it actually exact versions of the sword are in the Skateboard Museum in Amsterdam. It's not on display though, but there are a few attested examples of these swords with exactly the same features. So the whole research process was really cool for me. I ended up going to Middelburg to see the Zeeland chapter of the symbol of the Veilsee together. It was just a very, very fun, like the sword came with a whole bunch of learning experience and personal experiences that were very cool. So I think those two.
Yeah, nice answer. Good question, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I don't have any swords that I'm super attached emotionally, because at some point I decided, no, I'm just buying swords that I'm actually going to use somehow. So, and if you're using them, you accept that they get damaged somehow. But I would say my first rapier that broke a couple of weeks ago, because it was kind of a lucky accident that it was one stylish, so it made the best use of the cup with the engravings, but also that it had nearly perfect handling characteristics for how it fits to fence me, like the length, the stiffness of the blade, and so on. And I would be pretty sad that the bullet broke off, but then again, luckily I have a near identical replica here that has been hardly used that I can just use further. So if that one breaks as well, I have to really take a hard look at the rapier market and see what I can replace that with.
What part of it broke, by the way?
Yeah, just the pommel broke off.
Okay, so it's non-salvageable, or?
I mean, the hilt is pretty narrow already. If you made it even narrower, it would be really difficult. It's difficult to still use it.
Okay, cool. So, Mayor's Mate, I think this was a super cool question, maybe to close our call tonight on. Alexander, if there's anything you want to tell viewers or the community or anything in closing.
Yeah, so just about the book one last time, because probably some of you turned in for this. You can get it on Amazon. So wherever you are, just go to your local Amazon website, type in Schielhau, and you should be able to get it. If you don't want to get a physical copy, you can also get the ebook version. Doesn't work on e-ink Kindles, just be warned. You need to have some color display because otherwise you couldn't see the pictures anyway. So feel free to grab that one. And if you read it already and you liked it, you could be very helpful to me if you could leave a review on Amazon, because that's pretty much the only way that this book sells, if it has people recommended it. Yeah, and besides from that, if you see me on some event, feel free to say hi. We can always chat about stuff. So I'm always a bit irritated when people kind of get starstruck because I'm the guy from the podcast. I'm really not just some sweaty dude in a hall that's trying to have some fun with his rapier.
I don't know if mentioning you're a sweaty dude is going to help more people.
Yeah.
You. But yeah,
look
cool.
at the thumbnail from the episode. I have a very recognizable set of equipment.
Cool. Yeah, is it the one you have in the pictures?
Yeah, exactly that.
The book. Yes. Cool. Well, maybe we can show it so that there we go.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Alexander. It was a pleasure having you here, and all the best with your By the way, if anyone speaks German, make sure to be checking out Alexander's podcast. And yeah, whenever you want, you're welcome back. So
thank you very much for having me and having a lovely discussion.
Thank you. Have a nice rest of whatever's left of the weekend, and talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Oh.